right. Next on our agenda is the State of the Village address. So I'm happy and excited to share that. And so we'll get the screen set up for that and preparing for those online. While we do get that set up, I think the exciting is this is our second time doing this in a public forum. In the past, this was a chamber event that people had to pay and register to go to. So this is something that I strongly believed, and the board agreed with me that we should make this accessible to everyone regardless of their associations in town. And so very excited to do this for our second time. And I look back at 2022, looking at our first State of the Village address, we were, coming off the high of the centennial, and there's a lot of, how are we going to top that? But, as we started to prepare for the 2023 State of the Village, I think it was pretty impressive. We had a really good banner year in the village overall. So I think there's a lot for us to be proud of. So to that extent, the fun part of getting this to work the first time, but once it works, we'll be good. So state of the technology. And this is why we're implementing technology for our residents first before we improve the boardroom. There we go. All right. So if we look at 2023, it was a year of pop art in Roselle. So if anyone can go back in their memories and whatnot, we celebrated along with all of those across DuPage County, the Warhol exhibit that was going on at COD. And as a part of that, we honored our 4 notable Roselle residents at Itasca Bank and Trust and around town. It's also a great year for the village because I think this was the first year that I can ever recall that we were actually recognized as a top pick city or town to live in by the Daily Herald readers. And so what I love about that is that is submitted by residents, by people who are in the area, not anything that we apply for. There's not weird criteria that you see in a lot of those, travel magazines and stuff like that are just driving. It's really feedback from the public. And the fact that we are recognized, I think, is really exciting. And I think the reason why we were recognized is because we had 25 Roselle businesses that won the best of the best in one or more categories. We have some fantastic small businesses in our town. And I think oftentimes I hear a lot about what could we get in the village, what can we attract? And we always want to grow the village, but we have some fantastic businesses in our town that are recognized regionally. And that's a lot for us to celebrate and be happy about. We also had a lot of great things returned to the village. So I think in a lot of ways, when we started this board term, we were coming out of the pandemic in 2021. And so a lot of things had been put on pause. And so 2023 was the year we brought back the public safety open house. And so I think we're seeing kind of that normalcy and that rhythm come back, and we're really evaluating what were those things that made and resonated with the community that we want to continue to establish. And we continue new traditions with having our second annual Founders Festival. And of course, we budgeted for the 3rd annual one, so that's not going away anywhere. So as we continue to look around, we had a lot of important milestones as an organization. And so the one thing that I think we always think about as residents is all the things that we do from an economic development perspective, but it takes a lot of staff and people to make this village work. We have some fantastic people. And so we had 17 anniversaries in our community from a milestone perspective. And so I want to give a big shout out to Lori Donovan, who had 25 years in finance this past year. So we have a ton of people. And if you look there, we have representation from across all of our departments. And I think that really speaks volume, and a lot in police and fire. And I think these are 2 really taxing industries to be in. It can be really hard on families, and it can be really hard mentally, but we have some really great talent. And when they join the Roselle family, they stay with the Roselle family. And I think that's super exciting for us. The other thing is we had some really fun recognitions that happened. So our village administrator, he hates being recognized and called out, but so he received a great award from the ILCMA. And so we wanted to celebrate that one final time, at least until the next time you get recognized. But also this was the year that we're celebrating the return of an assistant finance director position. And so this was a role that we had eliminated during the recession. And as we've seen our business grow as a community, we have more revenue coming in from businesses and whatnot. Our finance department, and with regulations, needs to handle that volume. And so the fact that we can responsibly bring back a role, and that also speaks to the fact that the village is really doing well from a business perspective, I think is an exciting thing for us to celebrate when we look at our people. Now, when we look at things, I know money is a big thing, and we had, I think, one of our best years yet in getting grants awarded to us. We just shy of $4.1 million in grants that were awarded to the Village of Roselle. And so a big one for that was the pedestrian bridge that we'll be hearing more about over the next couple of years, and that was for $2.9 million. But we also received money from our Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy for stormwater projects that will be starting soon. We also received money from the state that will be used to help with culvert replacement on the Rosemont Avenue and Clearwater Streets. We also received money for our mental health services through the Bloomingdale Township 708 Board, as well as a partnership with DuPage County, thanks to our District 1 board member, Sam Tornatori. And so all these things really add up over time and whatnot. And I know it may feel like some of these projects may speak some to others more than, but I think the key thing is we're bringing money that we as residents are paying to these different bodies back to Roselle. And if we don't go out and pursue funding for the projects that are out there and find those right fits, we're leaving money on the table. We all pay taxes to every entity from the federal government on down. And I'm tired of Roselle paying money out of this town and not getting any money back in. And so I think we've done a really good job this past year. And so we'll see if we can hit 4.1 million again this upcoming year. But I think we had some really big wins, and that's something that we should all be proud of from 2023. Now, kind of breaking down into each department, we had a lot of activity. And so with our police department, the real story there is we had a lot of new leadership, and we'll continue that trend at our next board meeting with some new swearing ins and promotions being announced. But we had our longtime chief, Heron, retire last spring, and that brought on deputy, or now chief Bretto, formerly deputy chief, to the role. We also were able to then promote Rob Gates to deputy chief. And so we've had a new sergeant and a total of 9 new hires within the police department. So I think in an industry where you hear news about how hard it is to find employees, how hard it is to have people working, we in Roselle are a top destination for talent in public safety. And that's something we should all be proud of and we want to maintain. I think the great thing is when you have great talent and you have a great, strong department, that means you have fun. So we've had some good community engagement with Coffee with a Cop, Shop with a Cop, and then also some really great fun activities at the public safety open house. The big thing too that I know there's been a lot in the news is about the Safety Act regulations. And so we've been very proactive, and I think we have got a really great training program in our police department. And so we've been working to help get our officers in compliance and to be ahead of the curve and not waiting for things to kind of be passed down on us. And so I really want to commend the department on the progress they're able to make. And I'm really excited about where we continue to go when we go into the future from that side of things. Fire also had a very busy year. And so I think the key thing here is we're going on 2 years back to back with record call volume. So in 2022, we hit a new high, and in 2023, we said, hold that drink, we're going to go higher. And so we responded to 3,270 calls. And that is a lot of calls. And I want everyone to just take a moment to think about that. That is paramedic calls, that is fire calls. The firehouse is busy. So when you hear those sirens, I know every day I'm around town and I live very close to Village Hall and I hear those sirens, you know, I pause and think because we are putting our people in danger potentially, and they do fantastic jobs protecting us, making sure our residents are healthy and safe and they get the attention that they need. And so that means that there's a lot of investment that we have to make, both structurally and in materials, to make sure that we continue to be able to handle those call volumes. And it's going to be something that we're going to have to continue to evaluate as a community, because there's only a point where we can continue to break these records and not have to invest more in the fire department to maintain those things.
It's 9 calls a day.
Absolutely.
9 calls a day you guys are going out. Amazing.
The other thing that we had some exciting milestones, and I think I hope at least I remind the chief every time I see him, is the engine push-in ceremony. I thought that was a great moment for everyone to come together as a community and really appreciate the work that we do in fire and really get up and close with the apparatus that we have and invest in. These are some of the largest investments we make from a vehicle perspective, upwards of $1 million each. And so I think to be able to appreciate and see also how much our department appreciates what they have from an equipment perspective and whatnot, I think it was really great. And a lot of the kids, I mean, you can't beat fire trucks and kids, right? So made for a memorable moment. I know my daughter loved it a whole lot. We also got to welcome Ember to the department as well. And so this was our Roselle Search and Rescue Canine. And so I know they've already been called and dispatched on a number of things. And this is an exciting thing that we can provide, not just Roselle, but regionally as well, because there's not very many of these in our area of the county. So an exciting thing to continue to show we're investing in areas that are unique and differentiating our department. Continuing on with departments, we had a lot of economic development activity. And so, you know, we issued 86 business licenses in this village. And so I know we all think that we're a bedroom community and we're sleepy Roselle. There's a lot of things that happen in Roselle. And so out of that, I think that speaks to that whole bedroom community fact is that 23, those were home-based businesses, whether those are contractors, online retail, but that's a trend that we continue to see in Roselle, and that is commerce. for us. And I think that's something we overlook sometimes. But we also had some really exciting things that I know we like to see as residents, right? We had 4 new restaurants join Roselle. We have Sonny's Italian Pizza Kitchen on Lake Street, which has gotten rave reviews. Every time I go on to social media, I'm hearing someone else talk about their beef sandwich and it beats Portillo's. So not a paid advertisement on my part, but we've got some great activity there. Rose 11 is the re-envisionment of Hannah's Cafe on Monaco Drive off of Central Avenue, and that is open to the public. I know a lot of people have questions about that, but it's a great asset to our community. Bochilo on Irving Park, and the muchly anticipated arrival of Mangy Dogs Pub on Irving Park Road. And we'll talk a little bit more about them and how the village supported them getting to opening day. But we also had a grocery store retention is what I would put it as with Montrose Market. So I know we hear a lot about why can't the village get more grocery stores? We need to have them in, our downtown area. But the fact of the matter is the grocery industry is changing very much. And so when Butera announced they were closed, I'm just proud and thankful of our team and the fact that we were able to proactively work to help make sure that we secured a grocer to go into that space instead of leaving it vacant. Because a vacant space like that is not good news for our community. So maybe Montrose Market isn't your favorite grocery store, but we still have a grocery store in this village and I'm proud of them. And they provide a great service and a different offering than you get in other communities. And when we think about Roselle and how our competition is with Bloomingdale and Schaumburg, we're not going to get a traditional retailer to come in, but that doesn't mean we're going to give up. We need to find that right fit for the community and find those opportunities where we can bring those more specialty grocers to our town to provide much needed services for residents. The other thing that we had that was really exciting, I would say for some, maybe not for everyone, but after the referendum, we approved allowing dispensaries in the village and we were able to have one open up on Lake Street. And so it's our first and only dispensary, but so they've opened up and we haven't seen the issues or the concerns that I know a lot of people have raised. We'll continue to work on making sure that we don't see issues pop up. But I think that was a big milestone for our community as we look at kind of how do we diversify revenue and make sure that we're leaving ourselves in a advantageous kind of financial position from that side of things. As we also look at there's a lot of things going on in our development opportunity there. And I think one thing that I'm always super proud of is our occupancy rates. And I think that's something that people don't pay or see very often. They're on our strategic plan dashboard. So I plug in for that. We update that quarterly, but our office occupancy rates are 89.3%. And that is fantastic. Office vacancies are really struggling right now in this market with work from home and other hybrid working conditions. So our office occupancy is at a really high point. Industrial occupancy, 96.5%. And retail, 97%. That's something we should all be proud of. But that means we need to build more spaces if we want people to come into this village. We've got a lot of people clamoring and reaching out to us, asking for opportunities in the village. And oftentimes we point them to what's available. And it's either not up to their standards or it's just not a fit. But we've been continuing to market those properties that are available. And we've been able to do some really great things to stimulate business. And so we've given out $40,000 in TIF grants that were given to Mangy Dog to help them with some of their expenses. But we didn't stop there. We also gave them a public loan to assist with some of the installation of a fire suppression system that was required by code. So I think this is a great example of how the board listens to businesses. And when we see an issue, we want to try to help out a business owner instead of just turning them away. And so not only did we give them a grant, we gave them a loan as well to help them make sure they can get their doors open. So I hope everyone's able to get there so they can continue to pay us that loan. And our loan is the community that we gave them, but also the fact that we're really investing in businesses that we think are going to add value to our community from that side of things. We also had a lot of structural changes. So if you're a policy wonk like me, these aren't sexy things that you're thinking about at night, but we adopted new zoning ordinances for the first time since 1985. We had some outdated ordinances that made it very difficult for businesses to come in, very cumbersome processes. And as a part of this, we actually streamlined our boards and commissions. So we had 2 boards, now we only have 1. And so that means one less step for a lot of developers to go through and makes it easier for us to operate as a community. And I think that's something we can all be proud of. The other thing is we issued the last building permits for the Timberleaf development, the condo development off of Runenberg Road. So that's coming quickly to an end this year, and it's been very successful. I think there's some exciting opportunities for further townhome development, as it comes up. And a little bit of a slower year for annexations for us. We did see 4 properties annexed into the village, and I think it's a good time to remind all these annexations are voluntary. The village doesn't do forcible annexes. We make sure that people come to us and they want to be a part of our community from that side of things. Now, development updates, we have a lot of projects in flight at various stages. And so the first one is obviously Metro 19, and I will be the first to admit this is going painfully slower than I would have wanted. And so we're hopeful, knock on Formica, that this will be completed by the end of this year. They're currently putting on the final story and putting the roofing on. And so they'll be continuing to work through the winter as they can. And we'll start to see that really come to shape. And I know we've had a lot of the ugliness of that, but I think you're going to see over the next 12 months, when the facade goes on, the site actually gets sodded, planting and landscaping goes in, it's really going to show off as the asset that it's going to be for our community. The other thing is the village-owned parcel that's been kind of a sleepy lot at the corner of 390 and Roselle Road. The village has historically owned that wooded lot in that hill for a number of decades, but we recently acquired the house that was immediately adjacent to that. That house was a barrier to that area getting redeveloped. And so the board is authorized us to go through due diligence and soil testing to see if that site's even developable. At this stage, we have no idea if there is something that could be built on there until that's completed. But once that is done, we'll be able to kind of evaluate what housing proposals could work there. And so we've looked at a lot of different things. We shopped around with hotels and other things. The demand, the need, and the cost to do that just are not there. And so I think the board is realizing right now that what we see and has been available to us is more housing type things, which would step into the community there very nicely. One thing we haven't talked much about is the Maple Avenue commuter parking lot. So I know many of the public are aware that we did close that this winter, so we didn't have to plow it. We only had 2 permits held for that lot, so we moved them back to the main parking lot for Metro. And we'll have some very exciting news at our next board meeting because we have a potential redevelopment of that site that could bring some great uses to the village there. So maybe in keeping with some of the themes of restaurants like we've talked about in the past. So to learn more, stay tuned to our January 22nd board meeting. So, and then finally, last year we acquired the former Trinity Community Center on East Maple Avenue. And so we've gone through a number of different conversations with developers who've submitted us qualifications. And so we narrowed it down to 2 of those. We're kind of looking right now primarily at housing. Right now evaluating senior affordable housing, but we're also looking at other opportunities as well. So we'll have some more clarity later in the spring, but I think this is an example of where the board is positioned the village in a way to have control over our property so we can make deliberate decisions. And I think it's important that we don't rush just to build the first thing that comes to mind. We're building something that's going to have a lasting positive impact on the community, and we're making sure that it is something that's to our community's benefit. I think oftentimes we get proposals. In this case, there's a proposal we did not like. And so I think there's only so much you can do from the outside unless you have direct control over that property. So exciting updates coming there. From a public works perspective, and just to recap, we had some exciting new things either returning or being launched from that side of things. And so the shared parkway tree program made a return for the first time in a couple of years. And so that's going to help us reforest the village after we've dealt with emerald ash borer and other risks to our forestation policy. We also launched a new snow rodeo program to help train our crews, especially fitting for this upcoming evening and tomorrow. So that way we can continue to make sure we're efficient, we're responsible, we're doing the job as best as we can. From a budgeting perspective, last year we were able to resurface just a little bit over 1.5 miles of streets. Now the village has 74 miles of streets. So that's one of the reasons why when we talk about some of the funding challenges the village is having, this is one of the things that we want to make sure that we can address better going forward. But we also had a lot of maintenance to a lot of our water system and our wastewater system. So we replaced just a little bit over 1/2 mile of water main. We dealt with 32 water main breaks in our village, and we flushed just a little bit over 1,500 fire hydrants. From a wastewater perspective, we did a replacement for one of our lift stations. Now, lift stations are really expensive things that help pump the sewage to our treatment plants in various places, depending on how high or low the land is. It doesn't necessarily flow as easily with gravity. So, but we've been keeping up with replacing and monitoring those. as well as doing a lot of force main assessment, and we did a lot of proactive televising of sewer main. And so we do that to make sure we can detect, is there a break that could be creating damage to our other infrastructure, and just to make sure that it's being maintained correctly, and we're being good about replacing or fixing things that we can before it becomes a crisis. So one thing that we looked at last year and didn't necessarily happen is the municipal campus update. And I think this speaks to how we as a village pursue things in a very conservative way. And so we had originally gone out to bid for phase one, which was the pedal porch portion of the project, but bids came back higher than we anticipated. So instead of doing the irresponsible thing, we rejected all those bids and we went back to our design team and we said, make it cheaper. Is the easy short way of putting it. And so our goal is to go out to bid this spring again for the entire project. So pedal porch, pedal promenade, and the pedal plaza, with some refinement that's been done to make sure we continue to get the value of what we see this plan as, but taking away maybe some of the accessories and some of the things that were, more like to haves and not things that would impact it. So things like the general orientation of the porch will be a little bit different and things of that from the original sketches, but I think the essence of it still maintains, and we'll have a really great asset that'll be fantastic for the Taste for Roselle, for Rose Parade time, concerts in the park, a lot of events that we do today, and making it easier and actually cheaper to do by having things built in, not having to close streets, requiring less staffing and things of that nature to make those fun things happen for the village. The other nice thing is we are dedicating funding that is one time to these things. It's not going out of our property tax revenue or sales tax revenue. This is something that's being paid for by the American Rescue Plan Act money that we got from the federal government. So this was during the COVID time. And so this is something that we feel is a good way to give back that money, because that intent, we all as a community gathered together outside, and we found maybe we didn't have all the ideal spaces to accommodate people to gather outside in a safe place. And so we want to make sure that we're putting this towards a one-time expense that's out there instead of using it to maintain, like other organizations did, to maintain their normal operations. That's not a good plan to keep you sustainable in the long run. So that was a lot about 2023. So what's happening in 2024 and what is there to be excited about? And so when we look at it from a budget perspective, we're forecasting our expenditures to increase about just shy of $1 million. And so a lot of this is just the things that we're dealing with in our own households. Rising costs, inflation, contractual services, and health insurance are all big pressures that we're dealing with as an organization. We do forecast revenues to be increasing as well. And for this year, the board approved a budget that is balanced and has a surplus of about $100,000. Now, I think one thing to keep in mind is the village always is very conservative on its revenues. So we like to overestimate our expenditures and underestimate our revenue when it comes in. So that way, ideally, we make that surplus grow at the end of the year, as we have done historically. But in the case of a pandemic or a recession or a lot of those other nasty things that have happened in our history, even over the last 20 years, we're better suited to make decisions and quickly react to it so the village isn't in a bad position. In fact, because of those decisions the boards have made over the past almost 10 years now at this point, we have 53% of our expenditures in our reserves, which means for over half the year, if we didn't get a single cent, we'd be able to continue all of our operations as they are today. And so that's something that makes sure that we can react appropriately to things and make sure that we're on the right path. And a few things I just want to call out that are kind of anomalies. When you see the expenditures dip in 2020, a lot of that is because of the pandemic. We actually didn't do any streets that year, and we cut a lot of projects because we did not know what was going to happen. And then that big spike in revenue that we saw in the year 2022, I want to say, that was when we received that ARPA funding, that one-time grant from the federal government. So those are kind of anomalies to that chart as we look at the past couple of years there. Now, when we talk about our budget, we're mostly talking about the general fund. And the general fund includes revenues that we get from property taxes, sales tax, and the state income tax. Now, when we talk a lot about capital projects, and that's one of the big funding challenges that we have as the village, those are funded through utility taxes and other sources, not your property taxes. I think that's a big misconception. Tax bills are coming out or came out recently. What the village gets from those property taxes goes towards personnel expenses and those real core services like public safety, public works, and whatnot. So where do your property tax dollars go? If we were to look at that, more than the majority of it, almost half of it goes to pension payments. And so this is to make sure that we're not only fulfilling our obligation, but starting to pay ahead on what we need to fulfill from a funding perspective on that side. Then after that, 16% goes to fire and to police. And so very important services that we have as a village, obviously, and things that residents directly benefit from. About 10% goes to emergency medical services or EMS. And then the last chunk of that 7% goes to other municipal services. And those are general things like our finance department, snow removal, things like that. If you are services that all go to the residents and businesses at the end of the day. And when we look at that, we don't levy property tax in a way where we say the percent is going to be 10% this year and that's what you're going to pay. We actually levy an amount and we say the village needs to be paid X millions of dollars to provide these services. So everything is based on our budget and based on the numbers that we have. And then those numbers go to the assessor's office and are then calculated based on the value of property. And so since, looking back at 2021, the EAV in the village has increased over 8%. So as house values have gone up, we have not been increasing our property taxes at that same rate. So the impact to you as a resident on looking at the average bill is about a $26 impact if you're looking at your property taxes from 2022 to 2023. And so I think that's something we should all be proud of, is that the village is continuing to budget very, very responsibly, make sure our services are being delivered at an effective rate, so that way we don't have as big of an impact on those things that can really impact a family's ability to make ends meet. So this is based on an average home, about $250,000. So obviously everyone's situation is a little bit different and everyone's taxing boundaries are a little bit different. We have a number of different park district boundaries, school district boundaries, those can all impact you. But from a village perspective, your real impact is about a $26 increase on your property tax from us. Now, when we look at the budget, we have a lot of things that go into that. And so when we think about the property taxes, again, the majority impact on your end, I really want to use the laser pointer, which doesn't really help those at home, so I'm trying not to, is the school districts are the ones that levy the most from that side of things. And so when we think about property taxes, we really limit what we are applying that to, because we want to be very targeted about that. And with us having an infrastructure focus and knowing that property taxes are really not the way that we do that, we need to really find other opportunities to drive and use economic development and other tools to help us for our budget to hit the 12 million we need for capital improvements annually for this upcoming year. And so what is our 5-year capital improvement plan? So we have to invest $135 million in Roselle's infrastructure. So one of the things that we've been talking with residents a lot since last year is that we need to spend over $80 million in wastewater treatment. We have 2 facilities that are required to meet Illinois EPA mandated improvements, and the work's going to begin this year. We also have about just shy of $30 million in stormwater work that we have to do. We know flooding is a big topic in this community, and so we've been doing a number of studies to look at different basins based on the topography of land, see what projects can we do, whether that's adding detention, trying to help us with collection of that stormwater to make sure that we can keep our residents and our properties safe from increasing unpredictable storms and whatnot. As I kind of mentioned earlier, we need to invest more in our streets. So we've continued to do the best that we can with the means that we have been working with, but we need to invest about $12.5 million as of right now in our streets program. And so one thing that the village board approved in its budget for this year is to do a comprehensive pavement evaluation study, which will go over every street in the village. It does kind of sonar or radar technology to evaluate not just the surface level, those potholes that we see, but also understand, is this the base okay? Is there enough compaction of aggregate underneath it to make sure that street's solid? Or are there other issues that we need to address? And that's super important, because if we just resurface streets and there's a growing problem underneath, we're wasting our money. And we want to make sure that we're not going to have a sinkhole or something else develop over time. We're also going to be looking at investing in other things, such as the pedestrian bridge, which is mostly paid for through that grant, as well as other improvements, such as other walkable improvements to some of our main corridors. Our water system, we have to invest about $10.8 million in that. So we did our first lead service line replacement last year proactively, and so I'm really proud that we have been moving ahead of the federal mandated deadlines, but we have a lot more work to do. And so we learned a lot of lessons last year that are going to help us understand and shape the rest of the program for future years. And we're working to make sure that we can have all of our lead service lines replaced ahead of the Illinois EPA deadline that's been mandated. And then finally, and I think this is very important when you look at the scale of it, we need to spend about 1.5 million in our buildings and our grounds. So this year we'll be investing a lot of money to replace our fire department roof. There's the village-owned parking lot is looking rather rough, so those are the things that we need to improve on. But when you look at it, we really maintain our facilities well. We're talking about investing 1.5 million in scale of, we've got over $100 million worth of projects we need to do that are going to directly benefit the residents. And so we build good buildings that we can follow up on, and we make sure that we're taking care of them so that way we don't make those a bigger expense for us down the road, because deferred maintenance is a real problem, and other bodies that are realizing that problem. School districts have had referendums because of that issue. And so I think that's one thing that the village is, while we budget conservatively, we try to make sure that we're preventing those long-term issues down the road. So when we look at some of those highlights, I know we talked a little bit about the pedestrian bridge, and the bridge would start at the Metro station on the south side, and it would go over Irving Park running parallel to the train tracks, and would terminate at the auto mechanic shop on Main Street behind the Legion. One big thing that's helpful for us is there's a lot of land that we're able to build that on, so it doesn't impede the McDonald's, the Legion, and other properties there. And so that'll be a great way that would be multimodal. It'd be both for pedestrians and bicyclists to get across a busy corridor, because we all know that intersection with Maple and Irving Park is just not ideal. It's not very friendly to cross. It's confusing at times. And that's something that'd be incredibly more expensive to fix, but also it would require a lot of collaboration with other entities to get that approved, that we just don't think is going to happen. And so this is a great way to help that. But also, we're going to have a lot of new residents right by the train station with Metro 19, and we want them to spend their money in downtown. So let's make it easy for them, whether they bike or walk, so that way there's not another car taking up a parking spot on Main Street, because we already know it's kind of hard to find a spot when you need one. We talked about the pavement evaluation study already, but we're also going to be completing the Rodenberg Road improvement. So that was a great project that was done jointly with both the Village of Roselle and Schaumburg, and it was 80% federally funded and state funded. So that was a great example of how we're able to make our dollars stretch and go further when needed, because that's a very expensive project, shoring up that road and making sure that it's safe for the future. The other exciting thing that I kind of mentioned earlier is we're trying not only to think about roads, but also how do we connect people by their feet and with their bikes. And so one thing that we've been working on is preliminary engineering to do pedestrian improvements and streetscaping along Rosa Road and Irving Park. And streetscaping, the best example I can give you is think about Lake Street in Bloomingdale. So they put in new lights, they put in new buffers, things like that make it easier and you feel safer to be around there. That's the kind of stuff that we're looking at doing for Irving Park and Rosa Road. So a lot more to come on that, but like anything else, we have to do a lot of preparation, understand what the limitations are before we can move forward with any big project like that. And obviously a big thing out there that we've been talking a lot about and will continue to talk a lot about is the Home Rule Referendum that will be on the March 19th, 2024 budget. And so with $135 million of infrastructure projects over the next 5 years to fund, the board needs to find creative ways to fund that. And so as we are today as a non-home rule community, we have limited options to do that. And so in order to meet essentially, we have to debt service some of this improvement work. And we have a lot of programs available to us through the Illinois EPA to have low interest loans available to us, but we need about $4.5 million of additional revenue to pay those loans to fulfill those projects. We also know that we need to spend more money in our streets program, almost doubling that budget plus, as well as to make sure that we continue to work on those stormwater projects out there. And so we need to diversify our tool sets in order to make sure that we're not burdening that on just our residents. So the real difference between things is with a home rule status that would give the board the opportunity to implement different revenue sources that we don't have today. And so we could implement a local sales tax and a local gasoline tax that would be able to contribute and fund, based on our projections, all of the funding needs that we have for our sewer treatment plants, as well as help us fund most of the additional funding for streets that we believe are required. The nice thing about having a local sales tax or gas tax is that it's not just on residents, it's really anyone who shops or fills up their tank in the village. So visitors, people who work here, people who are just passing by, would all be contributing to the services that they use today. Right now, anyone who drives on our streets, if they're not a Roselle resident, they're not paying or contributing to that at all. And so when you go fill up your tank in Bloomingdale or Schaumburg, you go get a meal or you get your groceries in another community, you're paying for their vehicle stickers. You're paying to pave their streets. you're paying for their officers and other services that they provide. And so really what I see this as is an opportunity for us to level the playing field and make sure everyone pays their fair share. And we switch from a bedroom community, residents pay for everything mindset to a, we're going to share that burden across the board. Should home rule not get approved, the only other opportunity the village has to generate this revenue is through increased user fees and utility taxes. And so that would be primarily using the capital improvement surcharge fee, which was recently increased to $7.50 per 1,000 gallons. And if we look at the long year plans by 2032, that would increase to $20, which can be an impact of close to $1,100 annually for the average household. So with CIS fees increasing, that puts all the burden on our residents to pay for these improvements that we are required to do by the state of Illinois, and would not cover anything for streets. It would, and as other regulatory obligations come up or whatnot, we would need to find other ways to increase rates further in order to pay for those. And so one of the things that the board did when they went through this process, so we had a number of forums all last year to gather input from the community. So this all started with the State of the Village address last year, and we held a series of 3 to 4 forums. We had a coffee with the boards all last year, and we asked and surveyed the community to make sure we knew what the community wanted to do. And home rule came back as a option that the community overwhelmingly gave the board feedback that they would like to see us pursue. So in going with the initiation of it, the board set out 3 policy initiatives that they wanted to hold themselves accountable to based on this referendum question. So one was to stabilize CIS rates. So currently they're projected to go up to $20 per 1,000 gallons in the out years. And so the board is committed to, if home rule were to pass, depending on the rates that would be applied for a sales tax, capping those at $9.50. So that would be a $2 increase from where the rates are today. The other thing the board has elected to do is to continue to follow the property tax extension limitation law, or PTEL, that we're currently subjected to. And really what that means is under home rule, communities can technically increase their property taxes as much as they would like to. There's no limitations. This board is elected to say we're going to adhere to the same regulations and restrictions that we have today. So no change in our procedures as they are. And then finally, the board had said that they would evaluate whether or not vehicle stickers could be retired or be restructured based on this. So if we implemented a gas tax, that would change the way we get revenue for streets. And so right now, all of your vehicle sticker revenue goes towards our street program. It raises around $700,000 a year for us. There's very little overhead. Really, we pay to print the stickers, and that's about it. So from a cost perspective to us, it's a very low way for us to find an opportunity to find money for our streets program. If we had home rule, that would provide us other opportunities. If we implemented a gas tax, then there's a different way that we can find that funding. So there's a lot of confusion. Home rule is a very big concept. And if, besides one person, at least here in the audience, no one's really worked in the municipal space that probably understands how this would impact them. And so one thing that comes up a lot is home rule status permanent? If voters were to go out in March and say yes to this, it'd be in perpetuity. And the fact of that is that it's not permanent. This can be removed by referendum the same way, and the board could either initiate that or voters could initiate that themselves. And in Illinois history, only 4 communities have voted to remove home rule. And there's been a number of referendums to retain home rule over the years, but only 4 have actually said we want to get rid of home rule for our community. Another thing that comes up is a lot of people worry about, well, does this mean the village could institute a real estate transfer tax? And that's something that's not true. That's something that would be initiated by a separate referendum, and that would have to be approved by the voters. And that's something that the board is not doing today, not interested in doing, because we're homeowners just like you. And that's something that we just don't believe is a effective way to be managing things, and we have no interest in establishing that. Other things that come up with home rule beyond just this idea of financing and funding is a lot more of this local control element of it. So home rule units have the authority to act on a broader set of things that Illinois state law doesn't discuss. And so there's a lot of great examples like Airbnbs. We had that tragic shooting in 2021, and the board had, or not 21, sorry, that was 2020, my apologies. But the board had limited options to address that problem. And so they did it the best way they could at the time, but home rule would give the board more opportunities to regulate instances like that. today, the migrant crisis that's going on right now, all those ordinances that you're seeing out there, with the exception of one community, those are all home rule communities implementing that policy. And so what we find ourselves is this is a issue that has come up quickly, and there's not a lot of case law out there. And so could we implement something as a non-home community? Could we not? It's a little bit difficult to say how effective that would be. We might be challenged in the court system, and we'd have to see how that would turn out. But I think the whole idea is home rule would give us greater certainty that the rules we'd implement would be able to stand, and we would have some more opportunities to guide and shape that discussion for us. The other thing that this would provide us is potential budget savings. So this would allow us to pursue a credit upgrade, so that way when we do borrow money, we can borrow it at a lower rate, but also help us with other things we could do more creatively to help solve problems. I know tomorrow we'll be dropping a fireside chat I had with the Wheaton mayor, where Wheaton used their home rule authority to help them with pensions. And so there'll be an interesting example of how we could do things to save money from a budget perspective. But there's also a lot of regulatory possibilities that are exciting. And I know we're going to discuss a lot of this at our upcoming public forum in 2 weeks. And so we could implement a crime-free housing ordinance. Things that would help us do more stronger regulations for short-term rentals, more health and safety inspection requirements on businesses, and the ability to really revoke business licenses. Today, we don't have licensing authority. And so if there's a bad business out there that is not adhering to the quality that we, uphold in our village, we can't really shut them down. And I think we see a lot of these issues with certain business types out there that, they're legally permitted to operate, but do they really fit the character of our village, and are they operating in a way that we would like them to represent our village? And that would give the village the ability to really clean up some of these areas that, we've struggled with over the times, but also just address, like I'd mentioned, to local issues as they arise, because we don't know what the next big thing is going to be. I didn't have migrants on my bingo card as mayor. And so you don't know what the world will throw at Roselle, and we would just have more options to make sure we're making Roselle policies for our community that makes sense. And so I really like the Venn diagram because I'm a pragmatic person at the end of the day. It might give me a lower career longevity because I'm so blunt about things, but I think at the end of the day, from a village perspective, any community is trying to balance these three things. If you keep lower density, then you're going to have to make some sort of trade-off between, do you want to maintain lower taxes as well, or do you want to have stable public services? If you want to have really good public services and you want to have lower taxes, then you're going to have higher density to afford that. And if you want to have low taxes and you want low density, then you're going to have to sacrifice having quality public services. So I think where we're really at today is we know we have increased regulatory burden as a community. We want to keep taxes as low as possible, but we also value having people come to our house, when we have a call, right? When we call 911, we want to be fully staffed. We want to make sure that if you're putting in a permit application, you're not waiting weeks on end to start your project because our community development department's not staffed appropriately. We want to make sure that things are operating at the right level. And we also know we don't want to have, the village turn into Arlington Heights or some of these other areas where we have high rises everywhere and condo buildings. So while we try to find that right balance, we have to kind of see where can we be more flexible, and kind of home rule gives us that opportunity. Maybe we introduce some different taxes, but maybe those aren't taxes on residents only. They're taxing anyone who uses the village to conduct business in. And so a couple of things that come up. One thing about home rule that many know is that it's automatically granted to communities that have a population of over 25,000. And so I've seen and heard the rumors, oh, the village is only approving Metro 19 or other developments because they want to grow. They want to be 25,000. They want to get home rule. And I would say the village isn't going to grow to 25,000. In order for us to grow to 25,000, we need to build 6 Metro 19s. And that would change the very fabric of this community. And someone who has grown up in this community, who's been in this from a family perspective since 1921, I don't want to build 6 Metro 19s in this village, and I don't think this board wants to either. And so we're not going to grow the village organically to automatically get home rule. And I don't think that's the right thing to do either. We want to make this a policy decision that's with the residents and the board making a decision jointly. And so growing to get home rule is just not going to happen. So this is an inevitable solution for the village. This is something that would take decades of change that would be very, very impactful to our community. Another thing that comes up is, well, why can't you just grow revenue enough, right? Your revenue goes up every year. Business seems to be doing well, and we had all that fantastic news earlier. So why can't you just grow the revenue to 4 million? Well, with our current sales tax rate, which we get from the village, we have no control over we would have to have $800 million worth of sales happen in the village to get an additional $4 million in revenue with our current structure today. That's the equivalent of 10 Walmarts. And I love the fact that Roselle is not big box centric. We are all about small businesses. Just last week, we did a ribbon cutting for a wonderful person who's been a lifelong resident, and her son opened up a candy shop on Main Street. And that's fantastic. And we're going to get some revenue from it, but it's not going to be substantial revenue. But that's what makes Roselle special. It's family-run businesses that have a unique character to it and offer us something that's more than just goods and services. And so for the village to grow under its current circumstances, to gain that kind of revenue, we're talking about bringing in a lot of outside business and really changing the fabric of things, not to mention the traffic that would bring and other dependencies on services that we would need to increase our ability to deliver on. And so growing ourselves out of this problem is really not an option. And I know finally, a lot of the things that come up is, well, you guys are being lazy. Cut the budget. You need to cut your way out of this problem. The fact of the matter is $4 million accounts for 20% of our general fund. And so the village made a lot of deep cuts, and those are very painful when the recession hit in 2008 and 2009. But those cuts stabilized the village and put us on a really good path. We're adding a role today over 10 years later, finally, because we made sure that it made sense to add that role back. And so we've been running, I would say very confidently, a very lean operation from that perspective. We as village elected officials do not bring home a lot of money at all. All of our salaries are less than $100,000 annually a year. So there's not glut. None of us have a pension up here. And so if we were to cut $4 million out of our budget, you're talking about staffing being reduced by 20%. And so it's 20% less firefighters and paramedics, 20% less police officers. And if we're having record call volume, how would we deliver those services with 20% less? All of our other departments are a fraction of our public safety. And so we'd be eliminating entirely contractual services. So no street maintenance, no snow removal, like big changes to the way that we deliver services. So cutting really isn't an option either. And I think the thing is we're really smart about where we invest and where we don't invest. And so if we wanted to cut, then we're not going to see economic development. We're not going to see new businesses coming in our town because we're not staffed to support that. You want to do an addition on your home, it's going to take you a lot longer and more expensive to do that. And so there's a lot of things that are going to be a personal conversation decision. This is a complicated issue. And so we have a lot of content on our website. We've recorded every session that we did last year, but we're continuing to engage in the community. In fact, I think 2023 was a year we did the most public engagement possible of any year. Public forums, casual meet and greets with the community. We've been so accessible, and that trend's continuing. So join us January 18th for a community forum here at Village Hall, where you'll hear from myself as well as the police department on how we can implement different policies, and we want to take your questions. We'll also have a coffee with the board on February 10th and another community forum on the 15th. So I always say, celebrate Valentine's Day and then bring your leftover chocolates to talk to the village about money, because that's the best way to cure your Valentine's Day struggles. And then we'll have a coffee with the board on March 9th, all leading up to the election. We also have ourselves set up online to take any questions you may have, and we're going to be bringing you a lot of information over the next couple of weeks as well. So please pay attention to our e-news as well as our social media channels to find other things. Beyond the referendum, though, we have so many exciting things that we're working on. And like I said, we've got exciting announcements even just a couple of weeks away that we're going to be able to make public here. And so one thing that you can always do is check our updates on our strategic plan. So we started that in 2022. And so you can access at your fingertips live data that represents how we're doing as a village. All those occupancy rates, different revenue metrics, you can access that on a quarterly basis on our website to see how we're doing. And so the transparency that we provided as an organization is fantastic over the past couple of years. And I'm really proud of how staff has been able to really embody that. And like I had mentioned earlier, we've made a lot of progress on financial stewardship and development. And we're really kicking off a lot of this infrastructure, but I'm really excited because I really see 2024 as the year of customer experience. Like we just talked about before my presentation about new permitting software. How can the village continue to implement great options that even in that one, gonna give us better service and it's gonna save us money in the long run. And so how do we find those win-win scenarios and find opportunities to make it easier to do business? Because we should never be a barrier to someone coming to open up a business, or for you as a resident wanting to do, something on your property. We want to do it smart and efficiently, and I think this is a year that we're gonna really be able to make some good headway there. And so with that, I think that's all. Yeah, that's the state of the village. So thank you for joining us. I know that was quite a bit, so thank you for staying through that all. With that being the case,
I think it has to be a round of applause for you, David, for putting that performance together. You summarized everything that you wanted to say for us. So I'm gonna applaud you, and I think others should do that.
thank you. Special thanks goes out to our communications coordinator, Emily Glimko, who did a fantastic job putting all the content together. So thank you, and all the department heads for providing their information. So what I love about this year's presentation is I think we really not only looked at the organization, but we talked about all of our departments. Because I think we got a fantastic leadership team and they're all doing fantastic things in their own respective departments. And so we can't just innovate and stand on one leg. It takes a whole team to do all this amazing progress that we've been able to make. So with that, we conveniently have an opportunity for Village Board Public Comment again. So with that being the case, does anyone here tonight have any questions they'd like to ask? All right, let the record show none. Is there any other business for discussion? I'll say if you want an encore presentation or you just want to see it in person, we'll be doing it again in another week or two at the Chambers event. So find that information online. Otherwise, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Again.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Meeting's adjourned.